Thanks for joining us at our breakaway session today. With over 12 years' experience in the financial services industry, particularly in investment planning, Siba and Njoba joins us today to talk about everything related to both money and marriage. It's great to have you here, Siba.
Thank you for having me, Simone.
It's clearly an important topic that hits home for a lot of women, and whether you're newly married, planning together, or navigating those life transitions, understanding your financial foundations of your relationship is absolutely essential. So over the next 20 minutes, we're going to explore how marital regimes operate in practice, the financial implications of both divorce and widowhood, and the steps women can take to maintain independence and confidence through those important life transitions. Siba, should we get started?
Absolutely.
So I think before we actually delve into the practical implications and all the wonderful advice you're going to provide, maybe let's set the scene before we get started. So you obviously, advise a lot of women in your practice. In your opinion, what percentage of women actually understand the financial implications of their marital regimes?
So I'll start with the marital regime of being married in community or property, because that's mostly the problematic one. I think the important thing is you have a partnership of equals. What that means is you look at it as though we're both 50-50 shareholders of the union. And what that means is that all the assets I'm bringing in, all the liabilities and the debt you're bringing into the marriage, we will share them 50-50. So by getting married in community or property, you're already signing up to absorb your husband's 50% share
be great, eh?
of his debt. Exactly. And then from an estate planning perspective, you will have a joint estate, and you'll calculate executors' fees on that, and then you'll look at the deceased. So it has got an important implication for you to note up front as you're deciding to get married in community or property that you're going to take all these risks knowing that you're creating a joint estate ultimately. And then if you get married, the alternative is to get married out of community of property. What that means, we have now separate estates where the husband has his own assets and own assets and own liabilities. There's a Chinese wall basically. You have your own things and I have my own things. But what you can do there in that instance is create a trust for your children and contribute the wealth and the growth of the assets that we have in a marriage and put that in a trust for the benefit of your children. And the last one I'm going to touch on is getting married out of community property with the accrual system. Now, the accrual system is a bit tricky because it's got a net effect of at the end, you have a 50-50 impact. It's like an equalizer kind of a marital regime. And what that means is if the marriage ends, remember marriage is a contract that will end at death or divorce. So should death or divorce occur with the accrual system, the one with a bigger estate will owe the one with a smaller estate. So we look at our base cost, what we brought into the union, and what we have at the end. And if you look at what we have at the end, and I as the wife have a bigger estate than my husband, then there is a liability. There's a debt that is formed in my estate that I have to pay my husband's estate so that we have a net at the end. Now, the important thing we need to note there is how do we pay this debt? You need to make provision for that when you do your estate planning. So it's very important that you are here when you're making this decision.
Sounds like you need a proper checklist before you even actually step foot down that aisle.
Absolutely.
To make sure you've got the plan in place and asked all the questions to make sure you understand, right? Yeah, sounds good. In terms of, and I think it's important that we touch on customary marriages.
Yes.
In terms of the legal requirements to make it an actual union, and how do you actually go about legally protecting yourself in a customary marriage?
Sure, I love that question, Simone. So from a customary marriage perspective, there are 3 requirements that need to be met for your marriage to be legally acknowledged. You need to be 18, consent to getting married. There needs to be a ceremony to acknowledge that we're celebrating the union. So in the Xhosa culture, for example, the young man will come and ask to pay for lobola, right? So before that lobola event, if you don't want to end up getting married in community or property, you want to make sure that you've got an ANC, antenuptial contract done beforehand, because what will happen is, from a customary perspective, you will end up getting, customary law perspective, you will end up getting married in community or property if you do not have that ANC in place before you start the proceedings of the lobola negotiation. So it's quite important that you note that.
Now, what happens if I'm wife number 2 or number 3? What legal protection do I have if I'm a little bit further down the line?
Goodness me. No, for polygamous marriages, the misconception that we have is that if my husband is already married to wife 1, I can just come and have my share of the big estate. It is not so. You first want to consider the marital regime he entered into with wife number 1. Because if he married in community of property with wife number 1, automatically it means that you're having a half share of a half share already, because the first half share is with wife number 1. So you are then limited to share on the second half that's left. And that is something that we don't necessarily consider as ladies before we go and sign up for a polygamous marriage. The other thing is there's also separation of assets. There's the family assets, right, which don't necessarily vest to your husband or your prospective husband. And also the assets are separated such that his personal belongings and what belongs to the family as a whole, especially in a cultural setup, those are also broken down. So you don't want to just go in there thinking that, oh no, because I'm also one of the wives, I'm entitled to everything. It does not work like that.
Right. Important to consider. Very important things to consider. In terms of and a very important question that I think many of us actually deal with, I mean, I know a lot of my friends are in these situations, is the role of the home executive. A very important role in the family situation. And I think there really is 2 scenarios. So it's somebody that has always been a home executive comes into the marriage and now wants to build wealth independently because they need to look after themselves. You know, they're doing an important role for the family. And then you've got the career woman that decides to take a few years off to raise the family. Again, another important role. And, you know, and how does she safeguard her assets that she's already built? You know, so there's 2 situations. One where I've never worked, but I need to build a bit of wealth on my own. And one where I've actually built a bit of wealth, but now decided to take a bit of a backseat and look after the children at home. How does that work in practice? What practical advice can we do to help ladies in those situations?
Goodness, Simone, you know, the home executive is the most vulnerable woman financially because she's fully dependent on the husband or the provider. And there is also a trend where the husbands are now the home execs. So whoever in the relationship is the home exec, they need to protect their financial wealth. Or financial well-being rather. And the best way to do that is, remember I mentioned earlier that we can set up a trust. So whether you haven't worked, but make sure that your financial interests are protected. If there is a trust that is set up, make sure you're also a beneficiary and a founder, so that you also make sure you have a say or a trustee, that in that way you can also have a say in the manner in which the trust assets will be distributed and all of that. It is quite important that your interests are protected and you have a voice in the setup. Because the problem there is, once this breadwinner passes away, you are then left desolate. You don't have, or you don't know what's where, especially if there's no financial transparency in this relationship. So it's quite important to understand you're in a very vulnerable position. And if we were to take away this key individual who's bringing in everything, what happens to you? And you do not want to find yourself stuck.
It sounds like communication is, I mean, from what I'm hearing from you, communication is key to everything.
It is the cornerstone of the...
And these conversations need to happen way before you actually put on the dress and walk down the aisle.
Absolutely. And to blindly think, oh no, my husband will take care of me, that doesn't work, because he can come home the next day, give you divorce papers, and what do you do?
Exactly. Okay, so now the honeymoon's over. We've been married, the honeymoon's over, and I've actually decided I want out. I'm not happy and I need to leave this marriage. What is the one financial thing that woman needs to consider when she decides I'm checking out and I need to actually look after myself?
Sure, that question, Simone. You want to be financially fit by the time you decide to leave a marriage, because whatever safety there was in a joint union, if there was any, is going to be gone. So you need to make sure that you've got enough money to cover the legal fees. So before you even go ahead, make sure that you've got a cost estimate from your lawyers to understand how much will this divorce cost me. Secondly, the time in which there can be a to and fro, right? And a tug of war during the divorce proceedings. What happens to the children? What happens to you from a maintenance perspective? So it really is important that you make sure that you cover yourself financially and you're prepared for either way in which the divorce can go.
So it's getting all your ducks in a row before you
Absolutely.
even contact a lawyer. And now you hear about all the horror stories of all the hidden assets and retirement funds that you don't know where they are. I mean, what can a woman do to safeguard herself against all of that and getting to know, every little pot that is out there that she's entitled to?
You need to be financially astute in the marriage whilst you're still getting along, because you're not going to get any information when there are divorce proceedings. So I think it's quite important to have very earnest and upfront conversations. Also try and see if you cannot have a financial advisor who will assist you and a legal team prior to safeguard yourself, right? To know that you've got your ducks in a row and you're covered. Either way, whether we're going to end up divorcing or not, but you just want to make sure you've got your financial life intact.
In your experience, is there usually one financial advisor for the couple, or does a woman take her own advisor and the husband's got their own advisor?
It really depends on the relationship dynamics. Not all relationships are the same. It's not a blanket approach. So you would find that there are couples who are working together. They've got financial goals and they're planning together. And then there are relationships where they are operating in silos. And if he just does the groceries and pays for the bond, then off she goes, she's doing her own thing, where there really isn't unity. So it really depends on the relationship dynamics. And I really just do think that it's important to get all of these things right whilst things are still good, or you newlyweds. Get your financial fundamentals in place at the beginning and make sure you're protected up front, because you will not have any protection at the end during a divorce or when things are messy, or unfortunately someone's passed away. They won't be there to tell you where things are. So you need to know up front where things are.
So that's really quite an ideal world to get it done all right up front. But I suppose it's never too late. So, you can always, if you haven't got those ducks in a row just yet, start the process now.
That's absolutely. Yeah. And remember, the best time actually is to get everything right before you even get married, because then you're still eager to get into this. It's like applying.
Everybody's amicable.
Yeah. And also it's like when you're applying for a job, right? You negotiate upfront. You know that I'm going to be working at 91 for X amount month end, right? Same thing you should do here. You should know I'm getting into this union and this is what I'm going to get at the end, or this is what I'm signing up for, and make sure you get what you're signing up for.
So now if we cross over, so we discussed marriage, we've discussed divorce. Now a very important one is one of those horrible life transitions, and that's when your partner passes away. And I think, that's a really difficult time already, but it can be incredibly stressful in terms of the finances.
Sure.
So what happens financially when your partner passes away, especially if you're somebody in the relationship that hasn't really been involved in the finances?
The truth of the matter here is that a lot of compassion is required when one passes away, and you're not in a great emotional state. For someone who's been a home executive and not in touch with what's happening in the financial world, or maybe it's a professional in a different industry, it's difficult when you're made an executor of your husband's estate. Now, all of a sudden, you need to contact the master's office. You need to run around and have to bear the burden of winding up the estate. It's emotionally draining. And that's a time you're also most vulnerable emotionally. You do not want to be dealing with all of these things. And sometimes that's the area where other children from extramarital activities, they show up at the time, So it's quite important also then to have a life file whilst you're still married. Your husband must tell you where to find his will, who to contact, who's the advisor, who's the lawyer, who's going to do this, who's the executor, is the professional company appointed. Those are hard conversations that must be had so that when life does happen, it is at least a more seamless process.
And I think that's where the importance of a financial advisor also really comes into play, because, that's that one person that you can call that probably does know a lot about your family business and can assist you, with all those complicated transitions that you don't really know anything about.
And also assistance in finding where the assets are, which unit trusts, share portfolios, what will form part of the estate, what won't. The advisor is a good starting point to help direct you where you need to go.
now you spoke about the life file. I mean, and that resonates with me quite personally because, my husband, I work in this industry, but I didn't even, dawn on me to create this myself. But my husband has actually created a life file for us. So in the event of either passing, everything is in this file, all our policies, all our investments, even down to the nitty-gritties of, what insurance, he handles the insurance policies. I wouldn't even know who we're insured with, to be honest. All those are in that life file. So at the event of his death or my death, everything is in that file. And also for children, to obviously get access to everything, because there's always something sitting out there that somebody doesn't know about. And I think having it all together in one file with the contact person, what to do, and to actually, we've actually sat down and gone through that file. Yes. He understands, I understand, because we both got our own investments, so that we can actually understand what to do in the case of death. And I think that's such an important step.
Absolutely agree with you.
And it takes time. Not everybody gets to or wants to do it, and it's a very uncomfortable discussion, but it's one that needs to be had.
I agree with you completely.
Yeah. So life file, ladies, life file. In terms of family structures in South Africa and cultural structures, the age-old question of just trust me, I've got everything under control. Don't worry, honey, I've got this. And you don't want to annoy your partner by saying, tell me a bit more. So how do you get past that? How do you get past somebody that says, what, you don't need to worry, I've got this all managed? Is that a red flag, or is that a bit of a comfort? What would you say that is?
I'm going to lean back on your husband who gave you the file and said everything is here. Yeah. Or you can do it together. Then, and only when you have all the paperwork in place, when you know who the financial advisor is, when you know who we're going to deal with, who are the lawyers, who's the appointed executors, when all of that information has been discussed and agreed upon, that's the only time you should relax. Other than that, you need to get working and start that file, because without all of that information in there, you will draw a blank.
How would you start that conversation with your partner?
It requires, remember, before you get married, there's the process of the premarital counseling. I would then say, punt that question there. If you're already married, it's a question of safeguarding the children's financial future as well as yours. So you can position it in that way to say, I heard from the webinar today, these two ladies are talking about a life file. Don't you think it's a good idea that we have all of these things, or at least the fundamentals? Let me know where the will is, because that is such an important document when you are not even there to tell me where to go. Then you have to be phoning the banks, each one. It can just become really a tedious process if things are not in place. So to lessen the burden at the life event, have everything together.
And I think another lesson learned is make sure you have a seat at the table when you're discussing all your life scenarios with a financial advisor. Because if you don't have that seat at the table, you actually don't know anything that's going on. And that's probably the first step, because then you'll get a great bird's eye view into, where everything is and what actually is going on. So I think having that seat with a financial advisor and making sure you're involved in that process is equally important.
I totally agree with you.
So we have covered a lot today, and I think as a mom that has two daughters that are 14 and 13, so a long way off from hopefully getting married, but what advice would you give them before they take that walk down the aisle? So what advice would you give to my daughters?
I would say to your daughters, they need to maintain their financial independence and financial agility in any circumstance, married or not. They need to have options in life. They need to study. If one of the daughters wants to be a painter, she better be at a global stage, having her paintings in New York. But whatever the case, whatever she wants, she needs to make sure that she is in a place that will enable her to thrive financially, secure the bag, as they say.
So I can also relate a bit to my father. So my mother was a home executive, but she actually controlled all the finances. So it actually was quite the opposite. She 100%, I don't think my dad even knew how to draw any money out of an ATM. So she controlled everything. He brought in the money and she managed it, which is quite different, in those days. But my dad always said to me, with my mom being a home executive, which is quite strange, she always said to me, never rely on anybody else but yourself, because it's only you that can actually get you where you want to go and can protect you. And it's only you. So I thought that was quite apt from my father. That's how I've always thought about it, Look after you.
Absolutely agree with you.
Anyway, I think that's all we've got time for. Siba, thank you so much for being so generous with your knowledge today. I think this conversation really matters, and it genuinely will help so many people that are listening out there. If you'd like to keep exploring this topic, please head over to our Women in Investing Hub, where you'll find more resources, sessions and tools to help support you on the journey. And the full recording of the session will be available on the Hub as well as on the 91 YouTube channel. So feel free to revisit anything we've covered today or share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Very important, share it. And as we close off, please remember this. It's your finances, it's your future, and it's your move. And the first step starts with you. Thank you, Siba.
Thank you, Simone.